Little T Trauma, a limited series podcast by Lightcasting.
Guys, welcome back to Little T Trauma podcast. We're excited to do another episode with you guys. This week's episode is going to be about boundaries. We've had a lot of questions about this, and we've done a lot of work around this ourselves, and so we're excited to dive in with this. But we'll just check in with Laura and see how Laura's doing this week and what's been going on in her world since the last time we met.
All good over here, thank you. Apart from now I've got Janet Jackson's Together Again stuck in my head because she just said those two words, and I'm like, oh, I've not heard that song in years. But yes, all good in England, grey skies as per usual, but we are soldering on.
Yeah, I know. Do you guys pay any attention to the groundhog predictions, or is that just an American thing?
No, I don't believe I know much about that.
So it's basically this rodent who comes out and looks at his shadow, and he just predicted that, we will have 6 weeks of, or spring will come early instead of having 6 more weeks of winter. So, and actually it is aligning with actual climate predictions. So hopefully it'll be sunny sooner where you are and you won't have to deal with so much gray and cloud.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Get some sunshine back in my life.
Yeah. So what's going on with your business? What's in the word on the street in relationships and dating idiots?
Well, idiots are still at large in the world, so we've got to stay vigilant. But yeah, all is good over here with the business. Just working with some wonderful clients and getting them into alignment, calling in their ideal partners and having fun along the way.
Yeah, you're doing wonderful things over there. And if anyone's not following Laura, they need to go head over there.
Thanks. I'm stage mom.
That's right. I have no children, so Laura is my child that I have to be her stage mom.
That's how our friendship began all those years ago.
That's the weird basis of our relationship.
And what's going on in your world?
Just working on the podcast. Season 9 is underway, rocking and rolling. We have some really interesting guests coming. I have this lady coming to the show that I'm super excited to talk to. Named Lisa Tahir. She is we mentioned on the first episode that this is not an astrology podcast, but I'm deeply interested in astrology and trying to understand it. It's one of those things where I think you have to probably spend a very long time either self-educating or training in it to understand it. But this lady's planet or space object in everyone's natal chart called a Chiron and also known as like a wounded healer. And it is a good predictor of like the wounding we'll receive when we're young, and then how we use that wounding to heal the world. So like it's kind of that sort of adage, like the thing that hurts us is what we use to heal others. It becomes like our medicine. So she's like a specialist in that particular area of astrology that I find absolutely fascinating. So I can't wait to talk to her, and I can't wait to do that interview. And she wrote this really interesting book. So that's what's going up in my world.
And when's that podcast drop, that episode?
That one's not going to be till, I think, middle March. I'd have to look at the date. I don't have it right now.
Perfect. I'll be tuning into that one. I love a little bit of astrology.
Super fascinated.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So today's episode, we thought it would be good to explore boundaries. So boundaries is a fascinating topic. And when we were getting some feedback from listeners who've been tuning into episode 1 and 2 of the Little T Trauma podcast, they were really resonating with a lot of the things that we were saying. And the feedback was, some of those aha moments, like, oh, when I heard you talk about this, it reminded me of, this experience that I'd had that also, pointed me to something deeper and something that was linking back to something I'd experienced years ago. So on that note, we thought it'd be good to delve into boundaries. So it's quite a big, broad topic, and we'll do our best to make it manageable and not go off on too many different tangents. So Krista, I'm relying on you to keep this all kind of moving in the right direction, reining us in when we need to be reined in.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. I'll be directing from the sidelines.
Perfect. Just what you're good at, amongst many other things. Okay, so where shall we begin with today's little dive into boundaries?
I mean, I think probably the best place to start is just to kind of explain what a boundary is. And it's also like sometimes people think it's like something intangible and non-physical. In very extreme cases, it actually can. Like if you say to somebody, I'm not comfortable when you come over unannounced because I'm not ready to receive you, or like, that's a real physical, tangible boundary. But I think for the most part, like Laura and I are gonna talk about sort of boundaries that align with our values and how we want to be treated, and what we expect in relationship with others. I'm going to speak from the perspective of creating boundaries around familial systems, because that's where I have to practice it most. Laura, as she's going to talk about it from a relational standpoint with relationships and friendships, and go on to that side of it. So I think in general terms, boundaries are a way to like create barriers when things violate us as people, whether that violates our values or our what's the word I'm looking for here? Just like our constitution too, in some ways. Like there can be things that we just don't want to be a part of if it gets violated. And then working our way backwards by figuring out what we don't want and then creating boundaries that match that, so that the people around us and we can interact with each other respectfully. So Laura, I don't know if you want to say any more about that.
Yeah, I'm just going to say something that helped me when I first began my little journey around boundaries, because I grew up, I don't think I knew what a boundary was until I was probably late 20s, early 30s. I mean, I might be exaggerating, but that's what it felt like. And for me, when I was trying to get my head around boundaries after years of not really having any, because again, and I think probably a lot of people that will listen to this will identify as having some of those empathetic tendencies. You know, there's that label that people kind of put on themselves of like, I'm an empath, which can also be code for I don't do great with setting boundaries. And I definitely think I fell into that category for many years in terms of absorbing other people's feelings or making assumptions, maybe even projecting a little bit. And that kept me in some unhealthy situations and dynamics within most like relationships more than anything else. But one thing that helped me when kind of getting my head around what boundaries meant and what mine were was the premise of boundary is basically like saying this is okay, this is not okay, right? And like drawing your lines around this is okay, I feel comfortable with this is acceptable to me, and then here's the line, and anything past that line are things that I'm not comfortable with or that is not okay. So anyone who's just kind of starting out on their boundary journey, that really helped me.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one thing I'll say too, that the visual aid that you and I have talked about, that again my therapist showed me, which I think somebody showed her a long time ago, was that circular maze where you have yourself in the center and there's an opening, and the boundaries, depending on like, you know, who you trust and respect to come in and out of that inner circle, the medium circle, and the big circle. That's a really beautiful, and we'll maybe post it on our Instagram page. That's a beautiful way to even visually understand. Like sometimes there's this like also this comparison of boundaries to walls, but this image is great because it's like there's an opening, meaning that you allow people to move in and out of that space as they show up in your life, respecting your boundaries. You can allow them to get closer, to come inner rung or outer rung if they violate your boundaries, which is a really good way to sort of create a measurement and sort of like a litmus test for the people in your life if they're respecting those boundaries.
Yeah, definitely. That was a game changer when you shared that with me, because I think it highlighted something else visually in that, yes, there are different layers of access, right? So different privileges, different levels of access that people get to us, right? And just because, say, for example, you know, someone's in your family dynamic, so therefore they, you know, are pretty close to you. It doesn't mean that they deserve to have all that level of access, right? Someone might be in your family, could even be a parent, right? But if they're not showing up, or they don't have the capacity, or they've proven time and time again that, you know, they don't respect boundaries, or you know, anything to do with you, then you can move them further out in terms of level of access and stuff like that. And also in terms of relationship dynamics, right? So I fell into this little trap many years ago around when I started out dating somebody. I would have a tendency to go deep really fast in terms of like getting to know them and like, you know, sharing things that maybe they hadn't earned the right to hear at that point. You know, again, like I didn't have those boundaries protecting myself, right? And so if someone asked something, or I sometimes would even instigate the conversation, right? And basically be offering up this, you know, here's a guidebook on how to, you know, manipulate me, basically. And then like when
all my weaknesses.
Yeah. And then when it all went to shit, I'd be like, oh, what happened? What went wrong? Damn it, girl. You let them in too quick. Like I let them straight into that inner circle rather than
Yeah.
pacing the scenario and letting them earn the right into those
Hmm.
inner little circles. But yeah, I think we'll definitely put the visual somewhere because it is really helpful.
Yeah, and I was gonna say too, like when we think about relational, I guess circumstances with everyone about around us, and I'm talking relational, like anybody we have a relationship with. There's also like this overlay in families and in romantic relationships where if anyone is coming into that space with codependency, there's a lot of enmeshment as well that they bring that behavior in, and that can also feel like a boundary violation before you even know it's happening. I have been in relationships where I didn't realize that somebody was doing that same thing you talked about, like coming
Yeah,
in real hot and fast
yeah,
and like telling me all the things. And in some ways, like I remember being in a particular relationship where um, I was being manipulated from the standpoint of like this person was trying to tell me that they were the victim in all of this, but it turns out they were victimizing all the other people in their lives. And so I at that moment was like feeling very sorry for this person, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and then I had it completely wrong. But again, because they came in with the hot and the heavy and the fast and the details, and that I think should be like something we should be very wary of and careful and protective of ourselves if we do that. So I love that you said that.
yeah, definitely. And also just like on that journey of having healed a lot of things, we all have strong intuition, right? Sometimes we've watered it down or
Hmm.
we've shut it off, but it's always essentially there. When we look back, often we'll be like, oh yeah, those flags were there all along, right? We just kind of over overrode that intuitive hit or that gut
Yeah.
instinct, or because there wasn't any, black and white reason to take something on board, we just discounted it. And I think going on what you've just said there about describing those kind of connections that come in, they feel yucky, right? Something feels off. But
Yes. Yes.
when we've got unhealed parts of ourselves, or like, there's certain parts of ourselves that have called in or attracted that experience or that relationship to highlight, we can get sucked into
Hmm.
that drama of it, right? Or we can feel too disempowered to actually take action or address it. Whereas once we've done that work, it becomes much clearer to see, like, oh, that's a you problem, right? Like, oh, that's you step, like there's a line and you're crossing it, and I'm not comfortable with that. And it's much
Hmm.
easier and much less drama to acknowledge that and to then address that and deal with it when we've not got all of our own stuff and issues swirling around inside, making us feel a bit unstable as well.
Yeah, I had as one of my notes that there are red flags that we often learn to ignore, and I think again I'm forever going to be a champion of women because I think again we have not gotten the same flight path as men, and we really need to be mindful of all of the things that trip us up. But like for women, especially in relationships, we're often taught either by example or by action to ignore the things that really sort of raise the hair on the back of our necks and say like, okay, this feels icky and wrong, and maybe I should question this, or like the idea of just being like polite or small or compliant is so ingrained in like the female psyche to do that in a relationship. And I think we get really caught up in these boundary violations when we do that, and it's so important to remember to try not to do that if you can, to really trust your gut and trust that intuition that Laura is talking about there.
Yeah, and there's some little T traumas right there in terms of
Hmm.
when we've been in a situation where someone has overstepped a boundary, but we've not felt confident to address it, right? Or to protect ourselves or to even remove ourselves from that situation.
Hmm.
And we're just then in that dynamic that feels horrible. We feel disempowered and sometimes even unsafe. And yet we're not removing ourselves or we're not taking action on that. And I think there's definitely, examples in my
Hmm.
life where I've been in situations like that. And I'm guessing that quite a few people listening might also have had those experiences.
Yeah, one of the other things you said back there that I think is really important to underline also in the boundary work is like it's not a you problem. That is a very like it's such a spot on thing because it's a boundary with yourself as well. Like a lot of us also feel the need to fix things and intervene. And like you and I on our WhatsApp messages, I have told you like I am such a fixer. Like this is something about who I am, that reining in that part of myself
Yeah.
so I don't violate the boundaries of other people, and also give them the grace and the dignity to figure it out on their own. That's been a part of my journey with boundaries as well, like making sure I like allow people the dignity of their own process. and not intervene and don't feel like I have to fix, and it's not a me problem. They can do their
Yeah.
own thing.
Yeah. Allowing people the dignity of their own process is a really good way of putting it. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
again, often when we've incurred, certain life experiences or wounds in the past, we have unwittingly stepped into the fixer role, right? If there was a family dynamic that felt unsafe,
Yeah.
it's become second nature and we don't realise we're doing it. And I remember talking about this with a friend in Sydney years ago, like when we were both kind of going through this, realised I found myself like offering help, like someone telling me their experience and then I'm jumping in with a fix or offering a solution that they've not asked for, right? Or when we're on the receiving end of it, sometimes it can feel a little bit like affronting, right? We're a bit like, oh, I wanted you to just hear me, right? I wanted to just vent, or I wanted to just be heard or acknowledged in what I'm going through, and I don't necessarily want someone to come in with a solution at this particular point. And again, in terms of who is offering that, right? If it's some random person in the street that's just like offering you a solution that you've not asked for. So yeah, but I think this is what's fascinating about
that
the work,
can be
right?
icky too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, 100%, for sure.
I've realized too that like in some ways, like even though your intentions are good, which mine I've always been a good intentioned person by nature. I've noticed in having to rein this part into me that it also undermines the person's confidence, right? Like if you
Yeah.
say I'm going to fix this because you can't, you inherently, whether you verbalize that to them or not, you are telling them they can't do the thing. And that's
Yeah.
really disempowering.
Definitely. And I think as the other thing with that is it's a boundary on our energy and our own
Yes.
resources and
Yeah.
bandwidth, right? Because it's like if we're running around fixing everyone all day long that hasn't asked for it, like those fairy, like remember the meme where it's like a little dead skeleton running around with the tutu on and like the wand in its hand, being like, I'm dead inside, but I'm fixing everyone because we've just given and given and given until we've got nothing left. But we've not looked at the lines that are drawn of like, actually that's not my space, that's not my place to go and do that.
Hmm. I wanted to ask you about when you think about people putting up boundaries, there's this element of protest that happens, right? Because and you probably deal with this a lot with the clients that you work with because you are teaching them this ability and then they're changing the dynamic of their relationships. And that element of protest is really hard to deal with. How do you coach people through that process of dealing with the discomfort of the protest when you set up a boundary in your relationships, friendships, or work?
That's a good question. So there's a particular framework, and I don't recall off the top of my head right now where this came from. So I might have to do a bit of digging, then we can put it in the show notes. So first is the way in which we can communicate a boundary, right? So it doesn't have to be harsh and problematic. It can just be like that gentle setting of a boundary, right? So for example, it's like, look, when I experience this, then this is how I feel. This is what I need right now. This is what I'm requesting. And then giving that person the opportunity to be like, okay, I understand and receive that, right? So you've communicated what it is you need, or you've communicated the boundary that you're now setting. And then if there's protest, right, or if there's pushback in terms of someone's testing that boundary, then we have a couple of options. So one is to restate the boundary and be like, remember when we talked about, this the other week, this is what I asked for. Are you able to do that? And then a really key point here, and this can be tricky in and of itself, is having consequences if someone's repeatedly overstepping a boundary or ignoring your request, that's going to turn into an unworkable situation, right? Because
Right.
you just can't go forward from there. So it's unworkable because either you're going to have to backtrack on your boundary and tolerate something that you don't want to tolerate or are not comfortable tolerating, or there has to be consequence of that, right? Either that's less access to you, removing yourself from the situation, whatever hypothetical we're dealing with is having that consequence, which then is workable, right? That puts you back in that empowered state. So when dealing with this, they're kind of the key points that I always come back to is just giving someone that framework. So how to confidently communicate and ask for what you want and need. And, most of the time people are good people, right? Most of the time it will be met with respect. Or sometimes someone might slip up, and then when you correct them, that becomes the new norm. If someone in your life is not responding well, again, we're looking at, like we spoke at before, in terms of removing them further out from you, right? Restricting access or removing that person from your life altogether, if and where possible, to protect self, right? Because that's what all this is coming back to. It's about our boundaries and keeping ourselves safe. And if there's someone in our lives that is not going to respect our boundaries, then we have to really be mindful of that.
Would you say that there's like I don't know, an invisible equation for how many consequences you would give somebody? Or if we were thinking about that visual of the circular rungs or maze, how many times would you give somebody the opportunity to violate a boundary you've set in place where you would move them out a rung? Do you have any sense of what that would feel like, or is it just kind of like a case-by-case thing?
It's definitely a case-by-case basis, right? Because I was thinking about this before, like as we set out to talk about these topics. It's not safe. Some people might be listening to this and they're physically not safe to set a consequence. Yes. I've been in a situation in the past where I felt like I couldn't set a consequence because I didn't have the leverage in my life at that particular point, right? Like I was kind of in what I perceived at the time as a bit of a stuck situation. And I couldn't figure out a way to move through that at the time. So that resulted in me basically just kind of letting someone stomp on the boundaries, right? I would try and communicate, they would overstep, and I had nowhere to go. And it's such a frustrating situation to be in. And I know there's levels of that, right? Like in terms of physical danger or like safety, right? Like I was never in really any real physical danger. But I know some people, some circumstances, it might be more that way involved. Or again, if someone's got children, dependents, things like that makes it more difficult. So again, you've got to then work with someone, like speak to someone that you trust in terms of helping you work out, because often we can be quite limited in our thinking, right? Like, especially if we're in that fight or flight mode, it can seem like we have very limited options. Our worldview shrinks and we kind of need some help in going, can someone help me? How can I get out of this? Where can I have some flexibility with consequences here that are going to make this situation more workable? And then just putting yourself in it. I remember, again, I don't know where I heard this, I think somewhere years ago, and it was like, always have a fuck off fund. In terms of like some money put aside, so you never find yourself, whether it's a toxic job, a toxic relationship, a toxic family situation, so you're never stuck, right? And you've got some way out. So, and again, it's not always possible to do that right here and right now, but it's just something to keep in mind, setting yourself up in this way to protect you, right, and to keep yourself safe.
Yeah, don't get me started on people's financial situations.
That's your domain, right?
I'm like, that could be a whole podcast by itself. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with all of that. And you're right, like it's nuanced and it's complicated and it's dynamic. So I was just wondering if like you had kind of like a hard and fast rule, if there was some boundaries to be setting.
Today I do. Like today now I'm more secure and empowered. Yeah, like I have a very clear hard and fast rule of like one strike and you're out, or like one or two strikes and you're out. I remember years ago, I was going off on a little tiny tangent, but like I did a writing course and there was some particular guidelines, and it was right when you're writing, it was creative writing, and it's like, right, these are the guidelines. One off the top of my head was like, allow yourself to write garbage, right? Like that's one of the guiding principles of what we're doing here. Is like, allow yourself to write garbage, keep your pen moving, and I can't remember the rest. But when we have that as a framework, it's like then you're free to just create, right? And you've got these set of principles that you're following, and it's like, right, all I've got to do is keep my pen moving, not judge myself, and just allow myself to write and have fun. And when we've got those, when we're dating, for example, like we've got the guidelines that are going to keep us safe. So we can just then go on the date and enjoy the process and be present without trying to overthink everything, right? Because if we've got that sense of internal safety, and a lot of people that have, had pleasant or unfortunate experiences in the dating arena or relationship arena can often feel like their sense of self-trust has taken a bit of a hit, right? So one of the ways to rebuild that self-trust is having those healthy boundaries with ourselves, and part of that process is obviously having consequences if those boundaries are not met, and enforcing those boundaries as and when we need to. And if we can do that, that allows that sense of self to feel comfortable. The anxiety is going to be less because we know, like, okay, even if this person is not a match, like even if there's something, a red flag or whatever, I'm going to be able to recognize it, and I'm going to be able to do what I need to do to protect myself and keep myself safe and not get entangled with this person or like sucked into some kind of drama with this person. So that allows us to just enjoy that process. with those principles in place, right? Like our boundaries are a bit like our framework.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that to understand that they're not, that they need to be flexible too, as things change and you receive more information and you feel like you can trust yourself in situations and trust other people. Like, I think that's a good way to also not be so like, some people take the boundaries also to such a deep and dark extreme where it gets hard for you to connect with people too. So
Yeah,
we don't
too
want to do
rigid.
that either. Yeah, it
Yeah.
gets too rigid. That's also probably about control and wanting to be safe. There's some probably safety element there that somebody would be trying to create for themselves there, and that's understandable. But I just wanted to underline that the boundaries are not just the hard limitations. They should be flexible as we receive more information and understanding about the situation and the people and ourselves as we evolve.
Yeah, and I don't know if we've already referenced this in a previous episode or if it's just something we've talked about in the past, but
Hmm.
when we are going through a journey or healing something, often we can find ourselves a bit like a pendulum, right? So if
Yes.
the pendulum's in the center, that's like the grounded, healthy place to be. And if for period of our lives we've been like at one end of the spectrum, and then we'll swing back
Hmm.
to the other side just for a little time,
Hmm.
right? Until we then settle back in the middle. So if you've struggled currently and you're on the journey of learning about boundaries and starting to enforce those, you might find yourself being a little harder in the beginning
Hmm.
because you're just getting used to it. And sometimes we might run into some problems or challenges as we find our feet and find our voice with that process. But in time, you will settle into like that comfortable space, right? That kind of unconscious competence with your boundaries.
Yeah, honestly, I find that as to be a very healthy process. In my religious upbringing, it wasn't because it was all built in constriction and control. But most of us as human beings, if we have any level of curiosity, creating the break from that constriction to contraction and letting the pendulum swing both ways and allowing ourselves to test those boundaries helps us grow. And it's like being a toddler. Like when you think about, I've never tasted something, I like, what is this rock about, where is this going to take me if I crawl over here? You almost have to have like a beginner's mind when you start to test out life, like not just boundaries but like test out life, and take it with a beginner's mind and beginner's eyes, and know that in the process of testing and failing things, it'll help you ground yourself and know yourself a lot better. So I'm a huge advocate for that pendulum swing because it gives us a lot of information and it helps us really navigate the things that people have told us we shouldn't do, and then we get to try them and then see how it turns out.
Yeah, it's a process of trial and error. And so you mentioned that have had some challenges within the family area, right, in terms of boundaries. How have you
Hmm.
navigated that? Some people are quite happy and come to the point where they just remove family members from their life, right? Whereas others are like, oh, even though this person is a pain in the ass and a thorn in my side, like they're family and I can't remove them, or I can't
Hmm.
even remove them too far out because they depend on me for this, that, or the other. So how do you navigate that?
It is rooted in my religious experience because my family, there is no sort of like division between the church and my family's like their ethos and values of who they are. They're one and the same. And so me taking the decision to leave my religion of origin, I would say created a huge wedge of misunderstanding in my family. But then it also highlighted a lot of the toxic behaviors that are embedded in religious experience, but also embedded, I would say, in a cultural experience of a family where there's like pressure to conform and pressure to be normal and all of these things. So this experience happened when I was in my late 20s, early 30s. And the example that I wanted to talk about today was it's going to sound like a weird and silly example, but for lack of just not wanting to go into too much detail and also protecting my family as well, because they don't sign up to listen to me hear all of me bitch about them nonstop. In our religious experience and in our family culture, there was this culture of gossiping. And the gossiping was the way it was tied into religion was about like watching somebody create a sin, whether it was like venial or mortal or whatever, however we would classify it as. as Catholics, there would be this like, oh, this person did that or the other, and like, let's go talk about how terrible of a person they are. And like, that is just so gross to me now to like think about it in that terms. And that gossiping was kind of like a way to connect and relate to one another at the expense of another person. So when I
Yeah.
went onto my journey, I ended up becoming sort of like the focal point of like my family's gossip and my church's gossip, and sort of a pariah in these group of people. And obviously it hurt at the time. But then when I got out of my experience and I learned, like, when you and I've talked about this a lot in our spiritual experience and like our expansive experience, that would, words become what we define ourselves and what we believe those words are. And we have to choose the words we think about ourselves. We have to be really mindful about the things we say about people because they're powerful, right? So when I went on that experience, I thought, oh, I don't want to engage in this behavior. So for a while, when I was going through this hard part with my family, I literally had to ask them, I don't want you to gossip with me. I don't want to hear so and so's gossip. I don't want to hear you say something negative about this person or that person. I don't like this. And for the longest time, there was a lot of protest behavior that happened. So they would be like, why do you think you're better than us? And then it turned into like, well, you're judging everybody, you're just not saying it. And that was like such a projection. And I know we've talked about projection a lot too. Like, it became this huge projection piece of like, you don't want to engage with us in this way, and you're making us feel bad about it. Where I'm like saying, I don't want to do that anymore because that feels gross and icky to me. And I also don't want to think negative things about people that I don't know what they're going through and I don't know what their life circumstances.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of, again, like akin to what I talked about when I did my little T trauma. It was like, you are training the people around you what your boundary is. And for people that kept testing that boundary, they either got removed completely from my life or they got pushed out a rung, and
Yeah.
I don't engage with them in that way. So that was such a hard experience to go through. But there are many other ones that more, I would say more severe, less severe. But I just wanted to use that one as a good example of like, I had to keep telling them, I'm not doing this with you. I'm not
Yeah.
walking down this road of gossip with you. And they eventually learned, and they don't. Nobody ever speaks ill of other people in front of me and my family anymore.
Good. Love that. I've had experiences like that in the past in terms of being around gossip, or sometimes as well like getting sucked into it in the past. And there's something like, it is a low
Seductive
level.
about it.
Yeah, but it is seductive, right? Like it's like, oh, I'm on my high horse feeling like, because it's one of those things of like tearing someone else down to put yourself up, right? Which sounds like what they
Exactly.
were doing, right? In terms of like, we
Hmm.
judge this person, like we're separating ourselves from that, right? So we're the high and mighty, rather than, like you said, having some more compassion and empathy for people and their individual circumstances. But I've also been around people in the past where they've set a boundary, or, just from sometimes not even having to communicate the boundary, right? They just don't participate, and you notice, oh, this person's not joining in. So therefore now I feel less comfortable to say what I'm going to say or what I wanted to say, or
Yeah,
to be in that process. And it actually calls you to a higher standard, right? It's like that
I know.
person
I feel
is,
like that's so powerful. I love when
yeah,
people do
I love
that.
that too. Yeah, definitely. And it's like, yeah, let's hold up each other and ourselves to that higher standard and not engage in those low level behaviors.
Well, and it's so understated. Like, you just know, and you will feel like an instant moment of shame. You're like, oh shit, shouldn't be saying this, or like, because you just
Yeah,
know, like they're above it, and there's,
yeah,
yeah, and I just, it's so low level and it's so seductive in and of itself. And I think
yeah,
also too, when we think about ourselves as vibrational beings, like,
yeah,
the vibration of speaking negatively about another person puts us in such a weird funk. Like,
yeah,
I can't describe physically how it makes me feel. I don't think I would do it justice, but
yeah,
talking ill about somebody puts me in such a weird vibrational funk that
yeah.
I just don't want to do it.
It's not good for the vibes. There's
No.
a quote again. I forget who it's attributed to, and it's don't tell me what they said about me. Tell me why they were so comfortable to say it to you, or to say
Yeah.
this about me in front of you, right? Like, because what goes around comes around, so they say. And it's like, if someone is sharing gossip with us, then that there's a good chance that they're going to be sharing gossip about us with someone else as well.
I also think one thing I wanted to highlight in this, before we move on, is it's also the fact that they wanted to exert their will on me to make me contort and like to capitulate to the gossip. And I
Yeah.
know you can apply that for a lot of things in terms of boundaries. And so I think it's like important we think about the discomfort of setting boundaries. Like it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be painful. People are going to get mad at you. People are going to be, uneasy and unsure about why you're doing this because again, like we just said, when other people do it, like we're, oh man, that person's a badass, look at, they're in their power and they're like not coming down to this other place. But it also says something else about the other person if they're paying attention, and that can be really uncomfortable for them.
Yeah, definitely. This just reminded me of something that I heard Louise Hay say one time. And she was talking about how, I think it was in her book, You Can Heal Your Life, talking about her journey with, like we said before, our words are very powerful, the language we use is very powerful. And she said, like, she went through this phase where she stopped complaining, blaming, gossiping.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, and reading the news and stuff. And she was like, and I went through like a period of a couple of weeks where I was just like, I've got nothing to say. I've got nothing to talk about because, so used to that pattern of just not being, impeccable with our word, to reference one of the
Yes.
4 agreements, right? Like, we're just, saying whatever comes to mind without a filter. And like our words create, right? And everything kind of has that cause and effect. So I think being mindful of that, and again, even if it feels uncomfortable to us, right? Yes, when we're setting boundaries, it can feel uncomfortable to other people. But in the beginning, when we are setting a new behaviour, especially if it is going to be us holding ourselves to a higher standard, there'll be discomfort where it's like, oh, I would normally join in here, or I would normally say this, and it's no longer aligned with who I want to show up as and how I want to be. So I'm going to have that boundary with myself and break that pattern and that habit that's not serving.
Yeah. Before we get into these questions that people sent us in, so that we can share with the audience, I did want to ask you one more thing about boundaries that I think is really important, and I want to hear your perspective on it. One of the big things that comes up with boundaries is being able to say no, and no is a complete sentence.
Yeah.
So, thinking about boundaries and saying no, like where do you find that in the spectrum of boundaries to be something you should try to practice, something that's hard, or like wherever you want to take this question, how do you see saying no as a boundary, sort of having impact in relationships?
So first of all, I would say once you read When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate, that's going to help give you some ammunition to get much stronger with your boundaries in life, right? Because the subtitle of his book, When the Body Says No, is The Hidden Cost of Stress. So not having boundaries, I'm just holding up the book, not having boundaries can be stressful, right, on our bodies, or going against our own boundaries. But and again, in the early stages of starting to set boundaries, we might feel guilt, right? If we're used to people pleasing and then suddenly we're saying no. And again, like if we're getting that protest behavior as well, like someone's going to be testing us, and we've got to have that resolve to be like, no, actually I'm saying no and I'm drawing the line, and I might feel a little bit shit. I might feel guilty. I might be like, and that's our work to do, right? Whatever's going on internally at that point then is our signpost, because we can process that and heal that. And so the next time we say no, we can say no without having all that guilt and shame, or whatever else is going on under the surface that has been perpetuating our cycles of not having healthy boundaries.
Yeah, that's really good. The people pleasing is such a big thing with the not saying no. So we'll link that in the resources, but I want to give us time here to go over some of the questions that we got this week and discuss together some creative solutions for the people writing in, and give some additional resources or feedback that they might need. So I'll hand it over to you, Laura.
Perfect. So again, some of these are not necessarily questions, they're more just like people sharing their experiences. So we have this first one, and again, we'll just keep them all anonymous. So this person wrote in and said, this is more of a self-boundary that I need to honour, but something that just came to mind while watching the story is that I often find myself people-pleasing to the point of lying. For example, someone I'm interested in will be talking about their favourite movie or song or whatever, and instead of just being truthful when they ask if I like it too, I immediately say yes. Sometimes it's a no, and sometimes I've never even heard of it. So that's a big boundary I'm working on within myself, not telling white lies to make someone like a fake version of me. So I love that, because that's pointing to that authentic self, right? Like that's right in the circle of the boundary. Like the first boundary is protecting our authenticity and being safe to do so. So that's what I love about that one. Have you got any thoughts, Krista?
I think my first initial thought is if you want to take, if the person that wrote that in, I think it would be interesting to take some self inquiry to ask the question, like, who taught me that my opinion or the things I like don't matter? Because
Yeah.
underneath that, you are abandoning yourself and your interests to be aligned with somebody else. And so, where did you learn that behavior? I think that would be a great place to start to investigate, because I am a big a root cause analysis type of person. So I think, and I know you are too, Laura. So like, if you can get to the root, you can heal it quicker. So I think number
Yeah.
one, that's my first initial thought, and then the second thing is the lying, right? Because that's such a slippery slope. It's so hard to keep all our lives in order. So I feel like, don't do
Yeah.
that. If you can if you cannot do that, it's just too much work. It's such an energetic pull. I think the more you can practice being honest, will help strengthen your internal core of who you are. I think practice that next time, even if everything in your body is screaming to people please, to self abandon. That's my recommendation.
Yeah. Perfect. I love that.
How about you?
So yeah, pretty much word for word what you've just said in terms of
Ditto.
exploring that. And yeah, ditto. And yeah, just exploring then, like, what happens if I do voice a preference or say that I don't like something? Like, the world doesn't end, right? Like, that's when we get to have the, like, break that pattern that we learned, right? Like, actually, when I do this, it's fine, right? Like, there's no pushback or whatever it is that we've feared might happen in the past, and we'll start to build the new story, like the new narrative around trusting more your preferences, right? Like, and having those new experiences of what's different when I do state a preference or have a healthy disagreement with someone, and find that it's actually safe to do so.
And I think the fear underneath is something that, well, if you face your fear, that's a really big thing in anything you do. And oftentimes our fear catastrophizes or hyperbolizes what's actually going to happen. And if we just allow ourselves to test those things out, like Laura's saying, and we end up disproving our own fear. So I think that's a great piece of advice you gave there, Laura.
Perfect. Okay, and so this one is from someone who was noticing other people set boundaries in the work environment. So something that they've struggled with. And saying that I'm starting to notice I used to feel incredibly put out when people finished work on time or took their leave without a feeling of conflict. AKA could just walk away and go on holiday and not feel like, not worry about what carnage might ensue in the workplace. It took me a while to acknowledge that they're not being dickheads who don't care and leave others to pick up the work. They are just good at setting and, most importantly, sticking to boundaries. Obviously something that I need to do a lot of work on. So that's interesting. Because again, I've heard this in the past, right, where people are like, oh, I'm so busy, I can't even take a lunch break. And it's like, are you getting paid for that hour? Because if you're not, then I'd definitely be taking that lunch break. And again, it's like one of those things where people are like, oh, but for a quiet life, right? Like, if I've got to do the work anyway, then I might as well just power through and get it done. But again, we need to honour our own self, right? Like, what do we need? Like, do we need a lunch break, right? Do we need to take some time out and actually have a meal and unwind for an hour or go for a walk and, like, prioritize that self-care and have that boundary be there? So I think that's an interesting one as well.
Yeah, when we first talked about this one, like, this is something I'm also very passionate about with workplace boundaries, trauma, all the things. I think, but for this one specifically, where I want to take this first is, I think it's important in this question to also acknowledge, like, how am I contributing to that story? Because there's a lot of disempowerment sort of woven in there, where you're looking at everyone else basically taking their vacation, and I know they're, working on this, but it's also important to make sure that we don't self imprison ourselves in specific situations, especially
Yeah.
in the workplace. And I know for myself, speaking from my own personal journey, my parents are boomers, so they're in their mid 80s. And something they ingrained in me deeply was a very it's a hard work ethic. And so I had to unlearn this behavior too in the workplace as well, because I used to, like, overgive, overcommit, overwork, overproduce. I kind of touched on it in the I think the first episode. And there is something to be said that, like, once you realize in a workplace situation that absolutely nobody is going to advocate for you, And
Mm-hmm.
absolutely nobody is going to prioritize your mental health, your wealth, and your well being. If you
Yeah.
think about it like that, that's a great place to say, like, if I'm going to do this whole work life thing, how can I prioritize myself in this situation? Like, where are the boundaries I need to set up? And sometimes it's also about asking, what am I gaining here by being the person that always shows up, who always works most? Like, there's also something very ego identified in that as well. That something is being served there that's not really great because it's at the expense of your family time, your free time, being able to cultivate hobbies outside of work. Like, there's so much that can be getting left aside because your ego likes the idea of you being the hardest worker in a working situation.
Yeah, I think it's a complicated one for sure. Yeah, like there's the self-judgment as well narrative, right? Around if we're noticing ourselves observing and potentially judging other
Yeah.
people for having boundaries, there's going to be a lot of self-judgment going on, which is going to prevent us from honoring our needs. And
Mm-hmm.
also, what I found in my experience is I learned this quite early on, so I never put myself in these positions, and hence why I have my own business. But I noticed like you actually don't get rewarded for going above and beyond most of the time. And actually, the people that do
No.
have the stronger boundaries around work actually often get treated better, get treated with more respect than the people that are there like picking up the slack and going above and beyond and working themselves half to death. And it's like other people are not respecting that, right? Other people higher up in the hierarchy don't necessarily value that. They might think they
Mm-hmm.
do or like kind of portray that, but ultimately that's not the case for most situations. And actually, when we start to empower ourselves and have those boundaries in place, and again, this can be challenging if there's been a history of not having the boundaries, and then all of a sudden you're coming in and you're like, right, I'm going to change, I'm trying to change this lifelong pattern now and set a new standard here. That there might be a bit of pushback, or it might take a little while to get into that. But again, a lot of that is going to be internal work, right? And we're going to, once we
Absolutely.
start getting more comfortable with doing that for ourselves, the world is going to mirror that change.
Yeah, and one thing I bring up a lot with people, again, because I was the overproducer, the overworking, all of this, like, again, I've basically almost conditioned this out of me, especially because I want to be able to live a full life, and I can't do that if I'm working 16 hours a day. But one thing, I had this really beautiful aha moment, I would say probably 7 years ago. And when I do my coaching work with people, I basically say to them, like, when you're overworking yourself, that's not a you issue, that's a company resourcing issue. If
Yeah.
they are giving you more work than you can handle, that's the company actually not allocating resources correctly and then putting it on their employees. And I think we're seeing a lot of this mindset shift, and of the, I think the millennial, the I would say the younger millennials and now Gen Z that's coming into the workplace, they're not putting up with this like my generation and my older siblings and my parents' generations. Like, we just worked ourselves to death. This was
Yeah.
how everyone thought it was supposed to be. But then you get to the end of your life and you have, like, what, like, I'm not going to be on my deathbed and being like, I'm so glad I worked all those hours. But I think it's important just to remember, like, if you are overworking or you are having resentment for people who are taking time off, you also have to think about, like, if there's not proper resourcing, that's your company's issue. That's not your issue. And I think the way we change that paradigm is by shifting the narrative back and the ownership onto the company. And, like, most places do have anonymous things where you can write in, hopefully this person does as well, but being able to say, like, I'm working X amount of hours and so, it's not about so and so, it's about, like, the resourcing is not evenly distributed, and so maybe somebody needs to look at that at a higher level. That's the kind of conversations we should be having instead of putting it all on ourselves, I think, is what I wanted to say.
Yeah. And then just coming back to this unworkability when it comes to boundaries is because if someone's been in a position where they've, attempted to have those conversations higher up and, they've addressed that and still nothing changes, then
Yeah.
there's a couple of things at play. Like one is I think a lot of people, they have mortgages, they have families, and they need that paycheck, right? So it's not as simple as
Yes.
just like walking away, especially if they don't have a fuck off
No.
fund sitting nice and pretty in the bank account. But it's about, okay, acknowledging that and then going, okay, well, how workable is this for me and how sustainable is this for me? If I've, again, like you've
Hmm.
requested, you've stated this is what I need you to actually employ more people so that I'm not overworking and doing two people's jobs. And you've made that request numerous times and it's not getting actioned, then again, we've got to look at your other options, right? Because it's like, do you stay in that unworkable position and just slowly disintegrate with the stress of it all? Or are you going to have to...
just die inside?
Yeah. Or are you going to have to do something, like... And again, it can be really uncomfortable and really scary, and scarcity mindset can come in. So there are things that we can obviously work through internally to then make ourselves feel more empowered to then make the changes that we need to make.
Yeah. I don't want to dismiss any of that. I mean, that's all real, and I'm somebody who, you and I've had lots of conversations about this. Like, my financial stability is everything. I wouldn't want somebody to just like jump out of their job. So I'm definitely not saying that as well. There is a lot of things that, have to be in place if you are going to do that. And I think also too that in the workspace, things are changing where you can go somewhere else, and this isn't the attitude or the culture. And there is opportunity, but the change is scary. Change is scary whenever you do it, wherever you do it, in your personal lives, in your work, like your friendships. Like, it is scary, and it's a real thing. I think just to be very gentle and compassionate with those parts of you that get scared to make that change is important too. Like, we just have to nurture those parts of ourselves that are like freak out in those moments.
Hold their hand through the process.
Yeah. Well, were those the last two, or is there another one?
There's another one, but I think we probably have overshot on our 30-minute mark for this episode.
Yeah, overshot
by about the double. But so maybe we can save some for the next episode. And if anyone has any others that have come to mind as we've been chatting through this episode, to write into us either via Instagram, Little T Trauma Podcast, or on the Gmail email address that will be in the show notes.
Yes, and you can leave us voice notes on Spotify if you have the Spotify app on your phone. So you don't even have to email. Yeah, please somebody do that, because we're just waiting.
We just want to hear it. We want to. That would be so cool. People from all around the world leaving us little voice notes. They're joining on our little voice note adventure.
It is limited to a minute, so you might have to do a few. But please go to Spotify, the app, find us on there, leave us a voice note. It's really fun.
I might just leave one. I might go and do that. Put a fake voice.
And a mustache, even though we can't see you.
Yeah, I'm just filling up the voice message box with all these little voice notes.
That's awesome. Well, I had a great time with you today, Laura, talking about boundaries. I hope this helps people all over the world figure out how to do this. It's such a big topic to address, and I hope we did it justice today.
Yes, love chatting with you as always, and look forward to coming back for episode 4.
Thank you for listening. If you have a Little T trauma you'd like Laura and Krista to help you with, send it to littlettraumapodcast@gmail.com to have it featured on the show. Make sure to rate, review, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you can follow Little T Trauma on the Lightcasting YouTube channel. Little T Trauma is a Lightcasting production. Music by Score Wizards. Editing, directing, and post-production by Krista Ziomata. Lead vocals by Laura Forbes and Krista Ziomata.